Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida used to serve as the state's emergency management director. Congressman, good morning. How worried are you about this storm?
Yeah, no, I'm worried about the storm. Yeah. I'm worried about it from multiple fronts, Jim. I mean, obviously, let's start with the storm surge. We always like to focus on the wind, but it is the storm surge, it is the water that winds up killing the majority of the people. And so, listen, if you are in a low-lying area, if you are in a flood zone, if you are in a mobile home, and you live along that coast where they're predicting 15 to 20 feet of storm surge, please leave. Please go to a shelter. Please go to a friend's house. Just please get out of harm's way. It is unsurvivable. There are pet shelters. Bring your pets. That's mandatory in Florida. And so, look, the state is ready. We are prepared. Obviously, this is a state that's been hit, this area specifically, unfortunately, several hurricanes over the last 5 years, Michael and Idalia specifically. I feel bad for the people of the Panhandle, but Florida has one of the best emergency management departments in the country. All I ask is that the residents heed the warnings of the Florida Department of Emergency Management and the local emergency management directors.
Yeah, you mentioned Hurricane Michael. I mean, this has been happening over and over in that part of Florida. How does Helene compare to some of these others that you've seen hit the state? I mean, people might look at the hurricane forecast right now and say, oh, it's a Category 2, I can ride this out. Folks need to understand this is projected to become a major hurricane. And so, I mean, this could be right up there with some of the big ones that have hit that part of the state.
Yeah, again, Jim, sometimes people focus on these lines like, oh, it's going to be a strong Cat 2 or a weak Cat 3. That 5 or 10 mile an hour difference isn't going to make a difference when it comes to the storm surge. Right? So, look, I did the Hurricane Michael recovery efforts for the state of Florida. This hurricane, could exceed in surge. We could see a higher surge with this hurricane than even Hurricane Michael did in Mexico Beach. 20 feet would be higher. And so, listen, I want people who live in these areas, please heed the warnings. Please pay attention. Please listen. Again, the difference in this storm and some other storms is this is a big storm. So also, even if you're not in the cone, if you're not going to be in the eye, that doesn't mean that you're not going to see tropical storm force winds for hundreds of miles outside of the center. So we're going to have impacts all over the state. You're seeing those impacts in Pinellas County already with flooding. You're going to see that all along up the coast into the Big Bend. And so now's the time, obviously, to either get out and hunker down, get your last supplies if you don't have them. This storm is going to be moving pretty quickly, and obviously I'd be remiss if I didn't say the same thing about the residents of Georgia. Please pay attention. This is going to be some of the strongest winds coming into Georgia as it's moving very quickly. Please heed those warnings. Please get your supplies. Yeah, it could be very dangerous as it heads up into the southeast. You're absolutely right. I do want to ask you about the investigation into the first Trump assassination attempt. While we have you right now, the task force you're on is holding its first hearing about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. I do want to ask you, what are you hoping to hear from authorities? Well, today's hearing, Jim, is from local law enforcement, and so we're going to hear the perspective from the men and women on the ground who, quite frankly, watched the Secret Service fail, try to warn the Secret Service on what was happening. We're going to talk about communication failures. We're going to talk about the perimeter. But look, I never thought I'd be appointed to an assassination task force in my first 2 years, let alone, while serving on that task force, have a second assassination attempt of a former president. So this has been a bipartisan effort. This is super serious. You saw just the other day a unanimous vote in the House, unanimous vote in the Senate to make sure that President Trump has the protection that he needs. An attack on President Trump is an attack on all America. And so, we got to get to the bottom of this on a bipartisan basis, and we got to solve the problems at the Secret Service. It could be a resource issue, but I also think it's a policy and protocol issue. And sometimes you don't know when a system is going to fail until it gets tested. And so I look forward to listening to the men and women that were on the ground that day. And I do want to play a little bit of sound from what we've heard so far at the hearing, get your response.
This tragedy, and the very real threat to democracy of our nation, escaped that day. I think we realize it was entirely preventable. Had security vulnerabilities not existed, it is entirely plausible he might not even have attempted the shooting and would have returned home.
Congressman, how much trouble is the Secret Service in right now as an agency? Is this just a one-off, or are there systemic problems that need to be dealt with at the agency?
Well, look, I want to wait till we get all the information. I mean,
Yeah.
but I think the American people are starting to draw a conclusion that there are systemic issues at the Secret Service. I think the second attempt, even though obviously there was an agent on the ground who I want to give credit to, who saw the gunman and prevented that, and that agent deserves all that credit. I think as a unit, the Secret Service, I think the American people has lost faith in it. That's why we want to do this task force and get it right, Jim, to restore faith in our institution. That's why getting the information to the American people and make sure we're communicating with the American people on what we're learning as we learn it is so important. That's why the task force and the chairman is talking about that. People should be able to go to a rally in this country, listen to their presidential candidate of choice, and go home that day. We had a person killed at that rally. That's not what should happen in America. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, Jim, as someone who's from the city of Parkland, who graduated Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, people should be able to go to send their kids to school and have those kids home that same day as well.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. All right, Congressman Jared Moskowitz of Florida, thanks very much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.